Thanks. I hope I can get through everything. I've spent, a couple years doing this. I was supposed to do this at Marty's gathering a couple of years ago. And I'm used to an hour and 20-minute college classes to teach, so I'll have to stop it when I get done. If you have questions, certainly save them towards the end because I want to try to get through what I've got. But more importantly, I've got some handouts up here for you, one of which is an article about how Karg-Elert, came to the harmonium, and I'll talk about that. Also, a page on registration, so if you're not familiar with what he saw on the distinct sounds and tonal qualities of the different reeds. And there's also a piece up here which I will talk about. It's got 4 pages, and these are for you to take along. I didn't pass them out because, like me, I would be looking at those instead of listening to what's being said up front here. So if you have questions along the way, I'll try to answer those. Next slide. And that's, of course, there are very few really good photos of Karg-Elert, but if you see this is he in his studio, sitting at the grand piano, and behind him is most likely a Titz oder Kasriel harmonium that he used certainly to do his compositional work. And I wish I had a better picture of that instrument to know exactly what it was, but that's the best that picture exists. Next. And that's what I just played. Many pieces of Karg-Elert remind him of his homeland, Heimatland, in Schwabia. And this is a piece called Wald Einsamkeit, Sylvan Solitude. And it's a very simple piece, but it's quite beautiful. My personal introduction to Karg-Elert came when I was a student in college, and I was an organ major. And as part of my senior recital, I played probably one of his more simple compositions for the organ called O Gott, du frommer Gott. And it's found in this book, which some of you, I don't know if anybody has this book, but in this book, it's a collection listed as a choice selection of the composer's best works. It has the piece that you hear Rodney play on YouTube quite a bit, the Praise the Lord piece, that's in this book. And in this book, there are something like 19 pieces, but 10 of them were written for the harmonium, not for the pipe organ. But this book has 10 harmonium pieces in it. And so it's worth having, but it's also worth having for the strictly pipe organ music. When I went to college, I played that as part of my senior recital. Then when I started my church job first, I played one of his pieces that many organists have played, Nun danket alle Gott. It's like the war horse. If you name Siegfried Karg-Elert, most organists, oh yeah, I know that. I played that piece. Anybody play Now Thank We All Our God? If you're an organist, you've got to have played it at some point. But that's like the war horse, and it's probably one of his most famous pieces. The other is the one that you heard, Praise the Lord, with drums and cymbals. If you don't know what it sounds like, go listen to Rodney play it online. It's there a number of places, right? Yeah, you got it. But it's certainly a great piece. And it wasn't written for the pipe organ, it was written for the harmonium. Diane Bish even plays it, but anyway. Those are probably the most, that's the most that most organists know of Siegfried Karg-Elert. So the idea is that very few organists play a lot of his music. It's coming back into style again. Some years ago, the American Guild of Organists in the Lehigh Valley hosted a concert where Stefan Engels played, and Stefan is probably one of the finest performers of the pipe organ music of Karg-Elert and has certainly recorded most of his works. And he played his organ symphony. One of my colleagues who rode with me to the event went up to him, to Stefan, and said, "That was a wonderful performance of a tuneless work." And Stefan was quite gracious and gentlemanly, and he just smiled, and I just sort of walked away because I thought, wow, because it was a marvelous composition, but I guess it doesn't have a tune for the person. Well, as I mentioned, most American reed organ musicians and pipe organ musicians have never played any of his music on their reed organs. I know a couple of you were playing one over Crucifixus, which was played by, last night I heard him playing it somewhere here. But he was playing that, and that's in this book here with pink cover. But according to Andrew Hayden, Siegfried Karg-Elert is the one major composer of the 20th century who contributed a substantial body of serious music and writings for and about the instrument. That's both the art harmonium and the normal harmonium. The Saugluft, meaning the suction reed organ, as we know here in America as the reed organ, and the Druckluft, which is the pressure system of the European instruments. That third piece I mentioned, Praise the Lord with Drums and Cymbals, which I think it's found in this book, and this should be slide 7, I think, was, I consider a bridge for me to introduce to my pipe organ colleagues the music of Siegfried Karg-Elert, and then introduce them to the massive output of harmonium music that he wrote. It's a place to discuss, to educate, to inspire some of my colleagues to start learning some of his music. And this is another copy cover of a 2-volume set of the harmonium music, which is to illustrate the different styles throughout musical history of Europe of what it would sound like if a piece of music was written, say, in the harmonium in the style of Palestrina. And I'll say a bit more about that. These are 33 portraits, 33. They're short, and they begin with a piece in the style of Palestrina, early European musician. And it almost concludes with a piece that is in the style of Arnold Schoenberg, which was a contemporary and very contemporary composer in the time of Karg-Elert. But not to be outdone, I don't think I have it there, but not to be outdone, he ends the collection with a piece that is a portrait in the style of himself. And it's entitled Honorat id alla irbag Bagriella di Torino. I have not found a really accurate translation of what that means. Yes?
I do.
Good.
It is actually a dedication to a pupil of him, and he just wrote the name of this pupil backwards. And, she was an Italian student of him who studied in the late 20s with him, and they both had an affair, and that's the reason why he wrote this piece. And this piece, if you read under the title, Largo e sensuale and something like that, is an erotic piece.
Well, we'll talk about the women in his life, but I don't ever recall about the affairs. But that's, I always teach, so I say to my students, I like to learn something through their papers that I didn't know before. So I'll add to that to my list.
There's an article about that in one of the Mitteilungen Karg-Elert Gesellschaft.
Oh, well, that could be why. That's why I don't know it. I don't have that. You'll have to get me connected to that. Good. Thank you. Now we know. Well, now these pieces, these 33 pieces, I've often used on Sunday mornings because they are short and certainly acceptable to most audiences, much more, say, than Messiaen might be. Well, as I was writing this presentation, I was listening to what I consider his amazing work for piano, his Sonata Number 3. Impressionism, jazz harmony, expressionism, and chordal and melodic work are just packed into that work. You hear Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Schoenberg, jazz all wrapped up in a 30-minute piece. Anne Page, who is an expert in harmoniums in England, wrote, from 1903 to 1914, Karg-Elert's output offers a sumptuous picture of the twilight of Romanticism and the rising currents of Impressionism and Expressionism. For him, Debussy and Schoenberg were acknowledged and admired, but Edvard Grieg was his greatest inspiration. The unforgettable guiding spirit upon whose death Karg-Elert composed a final piece of his Intarscene, which I think may be next. No, it's not next. Intarscene, Opus 76. He began his life in music by learning to play at the piano at age 5, and went on to compose extensively for the piano and for the flute, which he also learned to play at an early age. He began to compose for the harmonium when he was 20 years old, and from that point till his death, he developed a passion for the capabilities of the free reed instruments. Me, personally, turning to his works for harmonium and now some of his shorter piano works, I find a never-ending variety of musical style to savor and to be delighted in, working through and on occasion performing in public. From short original works in the style of to arrangements of classical pieces that are adapted to the use on the suction reed instruments or pressure instruments, extended works such as his 2 sonatas for the harmonium, one could spend a lifetime exploring and analyzing and practicing and performing the music of Karg-Elert. For him, he spent an enormous amount of time focused on this instrument that we love, whether it was the suction or the pressure reed organ. In 1987, Andrew Hayden pointed out that it occupied him intensely for almost a third of his composing life. Now, my argument for this presentation for you and for AGO folks that I might do it with back in Pennsylvania is that he is worthy of being studied and practiced and performed. And second, his understanding of the complexities of the harmonium, whether Kunst or Saugluft normal harmonium, that he fell in love with, should not keep us from playing his music on much simpler American reed organs with a few ranks. And I'll point that out with his notes on registration in a bit. It should inform rather the way we might present his works. And these, as I said, are up here for you to take. In many of his books, you have on one side of a page, you'll have the distinct typical specification for the European harmonium, which is not there. You'll see it later. And then the other side talks about how to perform. But for right now, the most important thing to remember is he says, the present arrangements as they stand at once are available for any harmonium built on whatever system, suction or compression, with a keyboard division of E, F, or B, C. When playing on small instrument with one set of reeds, the signs indicating the registration and the notes referring thereto, such as 8VA, loco, etc., may all be ignored, and the notes themselves simply played in their normal pitch. In other words, if you don't have the ranks, this has so many ranks on it. I only had a half hour to play around with it on Monday at my son's house, and the first time I actually played a piece in public was just what you heard here, because there's so much on there, and it's just so much more. But he says if you only have an instrument on one rank, play the music anyway. And so, as Charles Callahan, a composer, once said, I never mark registrations in my music because every organ has at least one good flute. So you use whatever works for that instrument. You don't play a Hammond like an Aeolian Skinner pipe organ. You learn what you've got, and you learn to use the gifts of that instrument. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Well, this title, you can go on the next page, is Harmonium Onkel, because it comes from his biographical piece, How I Came to the Harmonium, which is a copy for you up here. And you have to follow the arrows, because when I got it offline, they had it all cut and pasted, and you have to figure out what goes where. But he said that that he came to the harmonium, he said he did not want to be looked at as simply the harmonium uncle. But on an aside, somehow related, I think, for me, is I had a beloved Sunday school superintendent we used to call Uncle Leo. And he was the one who played this organ on a Sunday morning. And it was this man who introduced me to the love of playing the organ in general. But this organ I still own. It's at my neighbor's. You see she likes to decorate. We literally rolled the organ down the street from my house because I had no more room for organs in my house. But it has a very good home there, and it does play. It's a chapel, Wilcox and White, with the shades, small shades on the back. and it does work. Hans did one rebuild on it. I did some more some years later, and I've used this in concert a couple of times. The worst thing, though, for a reed organ, just an aside, nothing with Karg-Elert, never hook it up to a vacuum cleaner with a variac, because that's what Uncle Leo complained he had to pump so hard to play the organ. And so one of the members got a vacuum cleaner and hooked up a variac to cut down the pressure, which really does a number on the reeds if you're not careful. It weakens the reeds because of too much pressure. But that's just a word to the wise. Even though Karg-Elert did not want to be considered the harmonium uncle, he really was, for many people, an inspiration, just like that Uncle Leo was for me. Next slide. Siegfried Karg-Elert looks sort of like Brattleboro from a distance, I think. Siegfried Karg-Elert was born in 1877 in the town of Oberndorf am Neckar. Neckar is the same river that Heidelberg flows from, and that's considered Schwabia in Germany. He never lost love for the Schwäbische countryside and is frequently apparent in his compositional works. The examples I'm playing today, at least that one, is indicative of that. He was the last of 12 children to be born in the family. His father was a newspaper editor. He had a small income and they were always poor. But his father died when he was quite young, at age 9, and so his mother and he went to Leipzig. By the time of his father's death, however, when he was 9, 8 of his siblings had passed away. And by the 20th century, only Siegfried Karg-Elert and 2 of his siblings remained alive. This is sad, but we're certainly fortunate that he was able to continue on into the 20th century. His mother was always a strength and support for him emotionally, and the first published harmonium set of 10 pieces are all dedicated to his beloved mother. And you can go to the next slide. And this is a cover of Opus 10, his first published harmonium set. In his article that is published, How I Came to the Harmonium, which appeared in 1928, we learned that the first reed organ that he had contact with was an Estey. And his first set of harmonium pieces, Sechs Skizzen, which is this, was composed on a 2.5 rank Mason Hamlin, 8 and 4, and another 8 Celeste, as we might call, in the treble end. So that was this composition that you heard was designed to be played on an instrument with basically 8 across, 4 across, and another rank of 8 in the treble. Not complicated. This was published by Robert Forberg, his first publisher, who put Opus 10 on it, but it was supposed to be actually Opus 1 from what I read, because 10 is more impressive than 1. But after Forberg, Karg-Elert sought out C.F. Peters in Leipzig as a publisher of his music. That didn't happen immediately. In the beginning, he had only American suction reed organ to compose his harmonium music. In 1905, Carl Simon sold him a 4.5 rank pressure harmonium paid for by the publications he had sold. 1 year later, Simon sold him an art harmonium, which he first used in 1906. It was at this point that he became passionate about promoting the instrument, which he remained loyal to until his death. And in Karg-Elert, Simon found a good person to promote sales of this up-and-coming whole genre of music created for this unique reed instrument. So I'm going to go over here and play for you a piece called Nachtgesang, which is from Opus 10, if I have it in my folder. Yep, I do. This, remember, was composed for a 2.5 rank instrument. I used more than the 2.5 ranks. Sorry. But when you have it in Rome, be Roman. This is a lovely instrument. It should go home to my new 20 by 25 foot building that I built. Apparently, though, I'm getting the orchestrelle that you saw at the museum. So that's got to fit in there. Anyway, this belongs to a colleague, Christopher Pastilla, from Columbia, Pennsylvania. It's a shame. It's a beautiful instrument. Case-wise, I think it's Estey's best design, and I think they thought so too, because it appears in many, many publications. Well, next slide, please. And you can go to the next slide there. Yeah, that's a good one. Next one. No, stop there. Okay. In addition to much of the original music that he wrote, such as his partita or his harmonium sonatas, which are quite extensive, or the pieces in the style of his 8-volume Gradus ad Parnassum, which is to go along with his Art of Registration. You can find much of his work, thankfully, on IMLSP, by the way. If you haven't found that, check it out. Unfortunately, my ink in the printer gets used a lot. But there's a wonderful set of pieces. It's so much better than the polkas and the schottisches in most American books, but it's simple pieces to illustrate how to play the harmonium, and this is up here for you to look at. But they're lovely pieces on their own. They work great as offertories, but you know, it's like nothing impressive as far as the title, Melodia Continuata, and it's to give you a technique of how to play with your hands across the break, say at middle C. Great little pieces. But his 6 sketches, which was Opus 10 I mentioned to you, which should be not there, but is a great collection, simple collection, again, all dedicated to his mother. Now, related to this, and Karg-Elert, is in his music, you find the most unusual expression markings, most of which are not in that piece I played, but you know, I tried to add my own there. In his music, you will find an amazing array of what he wants you to have the music sound like. Some of them are obscure. Now, in his Opus 26, for the double expression instrument, this is a piece called Reverie. There are copies up here, again, for you. It's 4 pages. But in 4 pages of music, he has not 1, not 2, but you'll see. Next. And you may not be able to see these, but sehr empfindungsvoll und ruhig, which for those who speak German translates as, well, ruhig is quiet, yeah, but basically with lots of expression. The next one in the same composition is leggero ed amoroso. Okay, well, he goes from German to Italian, musical terms in Italian. The next is poco stringendo. The next is sempre leggero. Next is rubato. Next is delicato. Next, marcato, sonoramente, dolorosa diluento, martellato generosa, amabile ed amoroso, molto sonora, misterioso, non slintando, dolcissimo. I think that's it. How many in that 1 4-page piece of music? I mean, overkill. But he wants specific feelings at certain measures. Amazing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Did I count 15? Amazing, amazing. And this is up here for you to take home and practice. Make sure you use all those expression markings. Now, some of those are familiar to us as musicians, marcato, leggero, yeah. But why he did everything in Italian, the musical terminology, except for the first one? I have no idea. But maybe somebody does have that. But 16 markings on a forward-page piece. So some of that may put off musicians who don't think they can ever accomplish that, so they don't play his music. Remember what he said, you only have one rank, you still play the music. You just do your best. He was very aware of the limitations of the American organ, what we have, and such as Estey and such as he first learned on. Carl Simon pushed the whole market for harmonium music far, far, far further than many others have. Now, the Mondborg Company of Leipzig, Germany, which he would have been familiar with living in Leipzig, I don't know that he ever played a Mondborg. Maybe he did. But the Mondborg Company, American organs made it over there. Lots of American organs made it over there. Few made it here. I think it has to do with weight. I once taught a student piano. His piano had, how many keys are on a piano usually? Well, this was a Chinese piano. It had 80 keys. Why? My belief is because 80 would fit into the shipping container easier with a load than 88. And I'm convinced that's why American organs made it over there, because they were easier to move, unless it's my Packard, which weighs like what 2 American reed organs weigh, because it's solid oak. I don't know, I think everything's oak. But he did not consider, some said he considered the American suction instrument as an inferior instrument compared to the European harmonium. But Arthur Nixon, a friend of his, in 1922, received this letter. He said, I should not like to avoid reference to my organ works for the harmonium. It was they which first opened international pathways for me. They have had their best reception in France, and you can turn next, there you go. Well, you're following me, great. Where the harmonium d'art has its origin. Unfortunately, this perfect miracle of an instrument, no admiration can be too great, has not found the least response in England and America, because Estey, Mason Hamlin, Wilcox and White hold the field there, and because in these countries one understands a harmonium to be nothing else but an instrument for religious worship, a little house organ. Certainly the art harmonium may be an ecclesiastical instrument, but its strength lies quite elsewhere. It as an instrument of expression, fabulously colorful, and in its action, absolutely like a piano, staccato, martellato, pizzicato, arpeggiato, etc., with strikingly orchestral character. Keep in mind, with the aforementioned quote he laid out side by side in his Gradus ad Parnassum, which I mentioned to you, his elementary harmonium school, Opus 99, how to register pieces for the Saugluft or the Druckluft harmonium, normal or art. And I think that comes next. You got that there. Okay. Now, this should be, I don't think it's just because it was for marketing purposes, his publisher, but because in America, one could experience more than just polkas, marches, hymns, schottisches on the American reed organ, thousands of which flooded Europe. Now, I want to play one piece from his Opus 104 called Seven Idyllin for harmonium, Idyllin. And notice that in his Art of the Registration, the second volume, which, by the way, you can print down. This is the second volume. His first volume was on how to register the art harmonium. This volume is all about how to register the unique sounds of the suction reed organ. It's never been translated into English. I think it needs to be translated into English. And it's, it's very complex. And I'll make a quote here in a bit. So the next slide, see what I've got here. Yeah, this is from his 6 sketches, which I pointed out earlier. But this is next piece is 104, which I don't have. But I'm going to go play that piece for you now. This is a piece that uses a melody and very soft, actually soft in the bass. And it's entitled, what is entitled? Es geht die Saga. And so I'll play that for you now. He was rarely called, by the way, by his first name. He often went by Karg-Elert. So let me go play that piece. Take that back. This is a piece that's in homage to Claude Debussy. It's called Bergmelodie. This is from his Opus 76. I've changed my plan. And in this piece, it's registered one spot to play vibrato. While you can't do vibrato on these, you can on the European harmonium. How? This is a test for question for the students. How do you do the tremolo high with 1 foot? Basically with 1 foot. While you're pushing with one, you're using the other to give the vibrato. You don't do it this way. You just 1 foot as you push it down. You're doing this, so the air goes through. But you can't do that in the American. So you just have to pretend. And I don't have a sordine on this instrument. Nor a soft flute. Oh well. I'll do that, and we'll do that. It's a shame the instrument's not in a live or place because, it would really, you could distinctly hear the differences. Well, in Karg-Elert's book on the Handbook for the Harmonium, published by Joris Verden, he lists what Karg-Elert considered the characteristics of a Kunstharmonium, some of which most of or many of you know, and it is, next slide. And again, I do have a registration here for you up here to use. But I just, on a completely unrelated but related, is the next slide. I have a model 86BQ. This is the art of registration, which, by the way, I have a copy up here and you can look at it. And next slide. This is his specifications. A wind supply with 2 independently expression systems, 1 for each division. I have a Treasure at home that has double expression. It's not double expression. It says it, but it's not. And Louis Heivner pointed that out to me. A double expression, you've got knee levers on both sides, and it brings volume to the left, volume to the right, and you can control what I call bass ascendancy by cutting back some of that bass sound so that the treble blossoms. That's first thing. Second, 5 octaves. Now, many of his pieces were designed for C to C scale, but the pieces I played today were designed specifically for F scale instruments. Americans' instruments mostly are F scale. 5 octave range, and you see where it starts. 2 forte espressive, again, 2 metaphones, which have to do with volume. 2 forte fixe, which makes the volume stay loud. Next. It should have a prolongement. Well, I didn't have a prolongement. I had a metal block. But he also says in his art of registration, if you don't have that, you wedge in where the key is, which some of us have used pencils, but I like the block because I can pull it off easier without breaking the point of a pencil. And some of his instruments actually have, and one piece which I probably won't have time to play, has you holding both ends. That he intended it to have a prolongement the whole way across, not just in the bass, but in the treble also. Just think how much more you could do with solo work if you had up here where you could sustain it and you could do work down here. But I've yet to encounter that instrument. Classic stops is a 4-row instrument. So much easier when you have European instrument to know, is it 8, is it 16, is it 4, is it 8? This instrument it's all over the place. It's got 16 foot, it's got 32 foot in the treble, all that kind of thing. And it's hard to know. Extra registers, harp éolienne in the bass, which has this, of course, a string tone 16 foot, a beating 16 foot, and a sonorous, highly expressive 32 foot, which this does have, which I think I used. Hans can tell me if I use it or not. And this is the art of registration. It's up here for you. It's important to note that, he lists every stop, the 8, the 4, the 16, and he has specific sounds, like the 8 foot, and I'll show you that in a bit here. Okay. All right, next slide. Now, I call this is not true, but I call this a pseudo Kunstharmonium. I have an 86 BQ at home. Casey did work on it. I worked on it. The lady that passed away, they called me, would I like the instrument? Absolutely. It's a wonderful little instrument. Casey can tell you about it. It's very compact, so much so that when Mason Hamlin built it, you had to carve out part of the back to get the Vox Humana to work. It kept hitting the back of the instrument. And then she called me down and I had to carve more out because I guess, I don't know why, but it was so compact. But the nice thing is the registration is harmonium registration. The 1's an 8 foot, the 3 is a 4 foot. It has a 2 is a 16 foot in the treble. It doesn't go the whole way across, but it's really a very useful instrument. I said that'll go with me to the home before I take the 2 manuals with pedal. But that's in the next rest. Now, this is what Karg-Elert says in his Art of Registration about the 8 foot diapason, principal sound on the reed organ. In the treble, he says, it's somewhat indifferent in nature. It's lighter, thinner than the tone of the orchestral flute, darker, more closed, duller, and more inanimate than the timbre of the violin. It's somewhat reminiscent of the accordion, dolce, or mild, distant principal English diapason of the organ, but bows more significantly bows more significantly in the latter. I mean, how many of you sit down and listen to, and he distinctly points out in this art registration, that the higher end has a different tonal quality than the lower end of the treble 8-foot. And the bass, again, has a different, he says in the bass end, and I didn't translate it, he says here, die untere Lage ist mild, ruhig und von sanfter Wärme. It's mild, it's quieter, and somewhat soft and warm. I mean, talk about such a romantic sound on the organ, huh? But this is part of what he did, and this is the German here. Now he also says, nach der Höhe, so wird der Klang dünner und spitzer. Every rank of the harmonium, he describes the tonal qualities of what's in the bass, what's in the treble, and he composed. If you ever play his music, sometimes you're down here, sometimes you're up here, sometimes you're here. Sort of like Rodney did in his workshop some years ago, where he took 8-foot and showed us what you could do, just spreading your hands out, putting them together, and it's well worth knowing you don't just play in the middle. You play wherever you need to. And I'm not saying Rodney because he can throw spitballs at me because he's right here. So now I've got a couple minutes, but I want to point out in December 1920, the first radio broadcast in Germany began. It was a Christmas concert that featured clarinet, reed organ, string instruments, and piano, and it was broadcast in Königs Wusterhausen. By 1924, that radio in Germany had 1 million listeners. Recognized after World War I, he played Sundays during the years between 1924 and 1927 on his Johannes Titz harmonium and someday I'd like to get one of those because of that. I have no idea what the music was he played. I've tried to research what the programs were. I'd be curious to know what those programs were, because after World War I, Germany was really in the doldrums, obviously. And I'm sure his music encouraged the people, made them feel good, and gave them some musical sustenance. And he did that for 3 years. Now, 1927, he stopped because in 1929, the Nazis took control of public forms of communication and entertainment and removed much of the creative efforts of the vibrant arts community of Germany. I guess accordions too, what we heard earlier. And by 1933, the Nazis had purged any and all Jews from radio. Important point. Interesting that something that kind of thing gets threatened many, many places around here in our country today, sadly, with the thousands of books that get banned. And maybe a political statement, but it is what it is. Karg-Elert lived through difficult times. He was criticized by the Nazis as being too radical and giving his physical appearance, which you saw, maybe a Jew. His character, his personality, because he also had sort of French interest in French style, he was accused of being a Jew. And until recent years, Karg-Elert was far more loved in England and Australia than he was in Germany. He never worked on a reed organ, but he sought to understand its very complex timbres and qualities of sound. Many of us spend hours and hours working on the length of time a reservoir stays closed, and some of us work at making our reeds bright and shiny again, and many of us spend hours tuning our instruments. But he expected the right pressures, the right tunings of the reeds, even though they weren't tuned in equal temperament. He wanted to understand the depths of his music. Next slide. I'm not going to play this for you, but notice this is a title of a piece that is from his 7 scenes. It's light autumn fog is brewing from the valley. Somewhere the lost tunes of a shepherd are ringing, long, exultant, elegiac above the head. The beautiful white clouds move through. This is all the introduction to the piece. I'm not going to play for you now because I don't have time. Go ahead. Next one. Next slide. There you go. I just got that up. If I was playing it, you'd see that while I played it. But I mean, he never lost his love for Swabia, for his homeland area in Germany, southern Germany, rather than in Leipzig. The next thing, I always look at what he did, and I consider him a sommelier or like those of wine or tea. Next slide. Because, you know, these folks that are those obsessed with the taste and the appearance of wine or tea, you know, they know everything. People who are tea experts can tell you where the tea was grown, when it was harvested, why it tastes the way it does, the overtones, the wine, tea, sommeliers, just very similar to his understanding of music. And the last slide I have, this is a Titz harmonium. Again, I got it off the internet. Marty and I know the internet's really lots of fun to find stuff. Don't have one of these someday, maybe, who knows. But I hope that if you've played the music of him, you've understand just a bit more about his impressive output, what he had to say, his message for us. And I just want to share one last thing that is in his letters to his friend in Australia, which is found in a book called The Harmony of the Soul. He says, "In spite of it all, I love my homeland. It's the land of my good, unforgettable mother." Very important for him. His last trip here at the conservatory brought his daughter, another important person. Several of his pieces are dedicated to his wife. Again, it's a matter of pure sentiment. I do not say that I love it as the land of Goethe, Bach, and Kant, for I also love Spinoza, Dante, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Byron, Tennyson, Carlyle, Ruskin, Rossetti, and Wilde, and Emerson and Kipling. He was well read. I love likewise Rameau, César Franck, Delacroix, Manet, Monet, Cézanne, Victor Hugo, Verlaine, Debussy. Art and science flourish in all places where God graciously endows man with rare gifts. I love art and science for themselves, where they are found in pure form. Political boundaries have not the slightest importance for me. It's not for motives of art and science. I love my country from primitive, inborn feelings, naive, non-reflexive. There is love in me, and in these times of deepest distress, this was written before World War II, and unthinkable disgrace and humiliation that can hardly be conceived, this love has become 1,000 times more intense. This is easily understood, as it ever is so with love. It gains strength only through suffering. His amazing output was really created in the midst of much of that suffering. Losing a father when you're 9, living through World War I, and the hatred that he experienced from the government still inspired him to write music. And then the last slide, should be one more, maybe, there it is. Paul Schenck in 1931 wrote this about it. He won the name of a modern and original master of tone color. He favors broad melodies, well, maybe not like that piece that my friend commented on, and bold curves displayed over a very personally fashioned harmonic background with prismatic changes of color. His strongest side is undoubtedly his harmony. Some of his harmonies produce an opalescent and iridescent tone color and a striking expressive power. And I think that's all I have on that slide. There's very little. You can find volumes on Bach. You can find volumes on Mozart. You can find volumes on Vienne, who wrote, by the way, for the harmonium. But you find very little about Karg-Elert's life unless you do some searching. I hope that if you know something about Karg-Elert, you learned something you didn't know. I hope you know nothing about him. At least it might inspire you to sort of search out his music and play. And as I said, if you have questions, I've got a minute and a half. And there are 4 pieces up here for you to take. And I also have a second volume of his picturesque scenes that was on From Foreign People and Countries. I have volume 1 and 2, but somehow he sent me 2 volumes of volume 2. So if somebody would like one of those, I can easily, I don't know why I paid for it, but I can see that one of you get that. So, yes.
You said questions, and I have a question.
Oh, no.
I've been sitting here with my eyes closed listening. People thought I was asleep during the night. So you mentioned the F compass and C compass, and my preference was a C compass, but I own an F compass instrument, and I find it very easy to play, especially when you're getting into the bass range. It just seems...
The F compass.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. in American instruments, or American suction instruments, you'll see both C and F. Can you expound on that?
I'm not sure where that came, you know, and I don't know that. No, there's somebody here who does. But I know that, again, some of his compositions specifically will not work on an F compass instrument, and vice versa. And so the pieces I played, they were actually written for F scale instruments because it takes into account that basic capability. Why it came to be, I do not know. Has nothing to do with shipping weight either. But I do not know. But you have to know how to adapt it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Tariffs were placed in the 1820s to encourage the American piano manufacturers and keyboard manufacturers. That might be the reason that you don't see harmoniums coming back across, because the American manufacturers were cheaper in the international market.
Good point. Good point.
Very good.
Oh, you have a question?
I wanted to comment.
Wait, you go. Wait. You make a comment, and then you get your question. Go ahead, Casey.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll get his
in answer
question.
to Bob's question about C scale and F scale, in my research, I've noted that my earliest Mason and Hamlin catalog is 1856, which is just 2 years after the company was founded. And so all of the melodeons are F scale, and the home style cabinet organs are F scale. And yet the church and the instruments I recommend for halls and churches and the two manual and pedal instruments are all C scale. So I think they're sort of forging a line between domestic and professional instruments for F scale versus C scale. And F scale does give you the extra bass at the bottom, which was probably welcome in an instrument that generally just had 8-foot, whereas the instruments for the professional or the institutional market had a 16-foot set, and in the case, of course, the pedal instruments had a 16-foot pedal. And so the extended range of the F scale wasn't really needed when you had pedals or a 16-foot manual set.
That's and also pipe organs are always C scale. Never, unless you get your you have a question here.
Quick comment that, yeah, what Casey said. It's very common that a 6-octave instruments would have a C scale. A good example is my flat top speaker. And the reason for that would be that instead of adding one full octave either in the bass or the treble, you add half octave on either end. So, so a good 6-octave instrument will more than likely have that C compass.
Right. The piano organs, piano cased organs. Now you go ahead.
Does that organ have a 32-foot stop?
Yes, yes. And my son, wherever he is, he never comes to my things. Oh, there he is. He never comes to my organ concerts. He takes care of the organs that I play sometimes. Oh well, he can tell you which is the 32-foot, which is you can show him them.
On the far right. The
Far right.
Second knob and third knob in from the right of the first string. It's not cold fire.
Yeah, it's a great instrument. Be careful, he'll take that home with him. Any other questions? One more, because then I've got to make space for the next person. Yeah.
I'd like to ask, why did Estey, as the other makers, put diapason in the treble and with far-right stop, which is the way it is on my organ? Whereas diapason is your foundation and characteristic tone of the organ.
Drives me crazy. My Mason and Hammonds I like because they're usually numbered, the list ones especially, and it's usually, you know, that 8-foot's in the middle. It's probably more a construction is easier with the stop action. Casey can tell you that.
Probably patents. Probably someone patented diapason as the treble and melodia as the bass or something.
Yeah.
And the other company had to reverse that. What the patent
If Milt Batchelor was here, he'd tell you all about patents. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.